The plane's cabin erupted in chaos as a flight attendant's voice cut through the air like a blade. I said, "You need to move to the back of the plane. Now." 3 identical 8-year-old girls clutched each other's hands, their matching braids trembling as tears streamed down their brown cheeks. Their mother stood between them and the uniformed woman, her designer coat open, her chest heaving with barely contained rage. Around them, passengers whispered and stared, phones already recording. What none of them knew, not the smirking flight attendant, not the nervous pilot being called to the scene, not even the other crew members gathering like vultures, was that the quiet, dignified woman protecting her daughters was Elizabeth Chen-Morrison, the CEO of Skyward Airlines. The very airline whose plane they stood on. And in exactly 4 minutes, every single person who had humiliated her children would wish they had chosen a different career. But let me take you back to where this nightmare began. Elizabeth Chen-Morrison woke that Tuesday morning in her Los Angeles penthouse overlooking the Pacific, the sunrise painting her floor-to-ceiling windows in shades of amber and rose. At 42, she was a woman who had built an empire from rubble. Her father, a Chinese immigrant, had worked as a baggage handler for 30 years before a workplace accident left him disabled. Her mother, a black woman from Atlanta, had cleaned airline terminals to make ends meet. Elizabeth had grown up in airport waiting areas, doing homework on torn vinyl chairs, watching the privileged world of air travel from the outside. Now she owned the 3rd largest airline in North America. She moved through her morning routine with the precision that had made her legendary in boardrooms across the country. But today wasn't about board meetings or quarterly reports. Today was about her daughters, Zoe, Maya, and Jade. The triplets were 8 years old, brilliant, funny, and the absolute center of her universe. Their father, Marcus, had died 3 years ago in a car accident, and Elizabeth had made a promise at his funeral. Their girls would never feel less than anyone, never be made small, never apologize for taking up space in the world. "Mom, are we really going to New York to see Grandma Jean?" Jade bounced into the kitchen, her gap-toothed smile infectious. She wore a purple sweater dress, her hair in intricate braids that Elizabeth had spent 2 hours perfecting the night before. "We really are, baby girl." Elizabeth poured orange juice into 3 matching cups. "And we're flying first class because you 3 deserve the best." Zoe, always the worrier, pushed her glasses up her nose. "But Mom, you said we should be humble. Isn't first class showing off?" Elizabeth knelt down, meeting her daughter's eyes. "There's a difference between being humble and accepting less than you deserve. Your grandfather cleaned planes for decades. He never got to sit in those comfortable seats. You will, not because we're showing off, but because we can, and because his sacrifices made it possible. You honor him by taking up that space with dignity and grace." Maya, the quiet observer, simply hugged her mother tight. "I wish Daddy could come." The pain was still fresh, a wound that scabbed over but never truly healed. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too. But he's with us always. Watching over us." What Elizabeth didn't mention was her decision to fly incognito today. She'd booked the tickets under her late husband's surname, Morrison, using a personal email account. No corporate perks, no executive notifications to the crew. She did this twice a year, experiencing her airline as a regular passenger, seeing what her customers saw, feeling what they felt. It was how she discovered that her Dallas hub had been discriminating against elderly passengers. How she'd learned that her mobile app was nearly impossible for users with visual impairments to navigate. But today, she would discover something far darker. They arrived at LAX at 9:15 for their 11 o'clock flight. The girls were excited, pulling their matching pink rolling suitcases, chattering about seeing their grandmother and visiting the Museum of Natural History. Elizabeth felt light, happy even, as they moved through the terminal she technically owned but rarely experienced from this perspective. Security was uneventful. The gate area was crowded but manageable. Elizabeth bought the girls cookies from a kiosk, smiling as they debated the merits of chocolate chip versus oatmeal raisin with the intensity of Supreme Court justices. She checked her work emails discreetly, knowing her executive assistant Paul would handle anything urgent. For these 5 hours, she was just mom. Boarding began at 10:30. They were in Group 2, first-class passengers. Elizabeth gathered the girls, checked that they had their tablets and headphones, and joined the line. The gate agent, a young man with a practiced smile, scanned their boarding passes without issue. They entered the jetway, the girls skipping ahead slightly, their excitement palpable. And then they stepped onto the plane. The first-class flight attendant stood at the entrance, a woman in her mid-40s with helmet-like blonde hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her name tag read, Cheryl Whitmore, Senior Flight Attendant. She was arranging champagne flutes on a tray when they approached. "Welcome aboard," she said automatically, then looked up. Her smile flickered, just for a second, but Elizabeth caught it. She'd seen that expression before, surprise, followed by something harder to name. Displeasure? Suspicion? "Thank you," Elizabeth said warmly, ushering the girls toward their seats. They had 2A, 2B, and 2C, with Elizabeth across the aisle in 2D. A perfect configuration that allowed her to keep all three in sight. Cheryl watched them settle in, her expression neutral but her body language tight. Another flight attendant, a younger man named Kevin, appeared from the galley. Cheryl leaned close to him, whispering something Elizabeth couldn't quite hear. Kevin's eyes widened slightly as he glanced at the girls. Something cold settled in Elizabeth's stomach. The instinct she'd honed over years of navigating corporate spaces, and before that, navigating the world as a biracial woman in America, was pinging warnings. "Girls, get comfortable," she said, helping Maya with her seatbelt. "Do you want to watch something or read?" "Read first," Zoe announced, pulling out a well-worn copy of A Wrinkle in Time. Jade wanted her tablet. Maya just wanted to look out the window. Elizabeth was arranging their things in the overhead compartment when Cheryl approached again. "Excuse me, ma'am?" The flight attendant's voice had an edge to it, barely perceptible but definitely there. "I need to see your boarding passes again." Elizabeth felt her shoulders tense, but she kept her voice pleasant. "Of course. Is there a problem?" "Just a verification. We've had some issues lately with tickets." Issues with tickets. Elizabeth knew exactly what Skyward's ticketing systems looked like. She'd approved the security updates herself 6 months ago. There were no issues. She pulled up the boarding passes on her phone, handing it to Cheryl. The flight attendant studied them for far too long, her lips pursed. Another passenger squeezed past, a white man in an expensive suit who barely got a glance from Cheryl. Behind him, a white family with 2 children who received warm smiles and offers of coloring books. "These seats are first class," Cheryl said, as if Elizabeth might not have noticed. "Yes, I'm aware. That's what I booked. It's just unusual." Cheryl trailed off, but her meaning was clear. Elizabeth felt the familiar burn of anger in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "What exactly is unusual about it?" "Well, first class is quite expensive. And with 3 children, I can afford first class for my daughters." Elizabeth's voice had dropped into what her executive team called her boardroom tone. Quiet, but carrying an unmistakable authority. "Is there an actual problem with our tickets, or can my children settle in for the flight?" Cheryl's face flushed slightly, but whether from embarrassment or anger, Elizabeth couldn't tell. "The tickets are valid. But I need to inform you that first class is a quiet zone. We can't have children disturbing the other passengers. My daughters know how to behave on a plane." Elizabeth's jaw was tight now. They've flown dozens of times. "Nevertheless, if there are any disturbances, any noise, any running around, I'll have to ask you to relocate to economy." The threat hung in the air between them. Elizabeth was acutely aware of the other first-class passengers watching now, some with sympathy, others with barely concealed agreement. She thought of her daughters, already sensing the tension, their earlier joy dimming. "My daughters," Elizabeth said, each word precise, "will not disturb anyone. But I want to be very clear, we have paid for these seats, and we have every right to be here." Cheryl's smile was razor-thin. "Of course. Enjoy your flight." She retreated to the galley, and Elizabeth heard more whispered conversations. She sat down in her seat, her heart pounding, and caught Zoe's eye across the aisle. Her daughter looked worried. "Mom? Are we in trouble?" No, baby. Not at all. That lady was just confused about something. But Elizabeth knew better. This wasn't confusion. This was something else entirely, something uglier, something she'd fought against her entire life but had perhaps naively believed wouldn't touch her daughters. Not in first class. Not on a plane. Not in 2025. She was wrong. The flight pushed back from the gate on time. Elizabeth tried to relax, tried to focus on the fact that her girls were safe beside her, excited despite the awkward beginning. They were going to see Grandma Jean, who made the best peach cobbler in New York and told stories about the civil rights movement that made history feel alive and urgent. The plane taxied to the runway. The safety demonstration began. Zoe watched attentively, Maya stared out the window at the tarmac, and Jade practiced her times tables under her breath, her new obsession. Then came the interruption. Cheryl appeared again, her face set in an expression of false concern. "Ma'am, I need your daughter to sit properly." Elizabeth looked over. Maya had kicked off her shoes and was sitting cross-legged in her seat, her face pressed to the window. "Maya, shoes back on and sit normally for takeoff, please." Maya immediately complied, sliding her feet back into her sneakers. "Sorry, Mom." "Thank you," Elizabeth said to Cheryl, dismissing her. But Cheryl didn't leave. "Also, the children are making too much noise." Elizabeth stared at her. Zoe was silently reading. Maya was looking out the window. Jade was whispering numbers to herself. "They're barely making any sound at all. Other passengers have complained." "Which passengers?" Elizabeth kept her voice level, but inside, she was seething. "I'm not at liberty to say, but I'm giving you a warning. One more disruption, and you'll need to move." The plane was accelerating now, the engines roaring as they hurtled down the runway. Elizabeth gripped her armrests, not from fear of flying but from the effort of containing her rage. Her daughters, her brilliant, beautiful, well-behaved daughters, were being targeted. And she knew exactly why. The plane lifted off, Los Angeles spreading out below them like a circuit board of lights and dreams. Elizabeth closed her eyes and made a decision. She would document everything. Every interaction, every word, every microaggression. And when they landed, there would be consequences. But first, she had to protect her girls. The seatbelt sign dinged off 20 minutes into the flight. Elizabeth unbuckled and crossed to check on her daughters, kneeling in the aisle between their seats. "How are you three doing?" "Good." Jade was already deep into a tablet game. Zoe was highlighting passages in her book with a pink marker. Maya looked uncertain. "Mom, why was that lady being mean?" Elizabeth's heart clenched. Maya, her sensitive middle child, always picked up on emotional undercurrents. Sometimes people make assumptions about others based on how they look. It's not right, but it happens. "Because we're black?" Zoe looked up from her book, her eyes too knowing for 8 years old. "Because some people have prejudice in their hearts. But that's their problem, not yours. You three belong everywhere you choose to be. Don't ever forget that." "Like Daddy said," Jade murmured, not looking up from her game. "We're queens." Elizabeth felt tears prick her eyes. Marcus had called them his queens every single day. Exactly like Daddy said. She was about to return to her seat when Cheryl's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your senior flight attendant. We want to remind all passengers that the first-class cabin is a quiet, respectful space. We ask that parents manage their children appropriately and ensure they're not disturbing other passengers. Thank you." The announcement was unnecessary, pointedly directed, and humiliating. Elizabeth felt every eye in the cabin turn toward her and her daughters. An older white woman 2 rows back actually tooted audibly. A businessman smirked. But there were others. A black couple in row 4 caught Elizabeth's eye, their expression sympathetic and angry. A Latina woman traveling alone gave her a small nod of solidarity. An Asian man in row 5 shook his head in disgust, at Cheryl, not at Elizabeth. Elizabeth returned to her seat, pulled out her phone, and began typing notes. Time stamps, exact quotes, witness positions. Her legal background, she'd passed the bar before pivoting to business, kicked in automatically. She was building a case. Kevin, the younger flight attendant, appeared with the beverage cart. His eyes were apologetic. "What can I get you?" "Ginger ale, please. And 3 apple juices for my daughters." He prepared the drinks silently, then leaned in slightly as he handed them over. His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry about Cheryl. This isn't. I don't agree with how she's handling this." Elizabeth met his eyes. "Then I hope you'll remember what you've seen today." He nodded almost imperceptibly and moved on. For the next hour, an uneasy peace settled over the cabin. The girls were perfectly behaved, quiet, contained, disturbing no one. Elizabeth worked on her laptop, reviewing contracts that suddenly seemed far less important than the lesson her daughters were learning about how the world could treat them. Then came lunch service. Cheryl pushed the meal cart through the cabin, all practiced efficiency and fake smiles. The White family behind Elizabeth received their meals with flourishes and extra bread rolls. The businessman got a double pour of wine without asking. When Cheryl reached Elizabeth's daughters, her expression hardened. "Children's meals are only available in economy," she announced. Elizabeth looked up sharply. "That's not true. Your menu specifically lists children's options for all cabins. We're out in first class. Then my daughters will have the adult meals." "They're not picky." Cheryl's smile was venomous. "The adult meals contain ingredients that might not be suitable for children. I couldn't possibly take responsibility if something happens. I'm their mother. I'll take responsibility." "They'll have the chicken, please." "I'm afraid I can't allow that. For safety reasons." Elizabeth felt something snap inside her. She stood, her 5'9" frame suddenly seeming much taller, her voice carrying through the cabin. "You're telling me that my daughters, who have paid for first-class seats, cannot eat the first-class meal?" "That's correct." "And what, exactly, would you suggest they eat for the next 4 hours?" "There are crackers available." "Crackers?" Elizabeth heard the word echo in her mind, saw her daughters' confused faces, felt the weight of every ancestor who'd been told they weren't good enough, weren't welcome, should be grateful for scraps. "No," Elizabeth said quietly. "That's not acceptable." Cheryl's face flushed red. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice and return to your seat. I'm standing in the aisle of a plane I'm paying to be on, advocating for my children to receive the service they're entitled to. I'm not going anywhere until this is resolved." Other passengers were definitely watching now. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed to be enjoying the show. The black couple in row 4 had their phones out, recording. Kevin appeared from the galley, looking panicked. "Cheryl, maybe we could—" "Kevin, please inform the captain that we have an unruly passenger in first class." "Unruly?" Elizabeth laughed, a sharp sound with no humor in it. "I'm asking for the meal service my daughters paid for. That's not unruly. That's expecting basic service. You're causing a disturbance. No. You're discriminating against my children, and I'm calling you out on it." The word hung in the air. Discriminating. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably. The businessman suddenly became very interested in his phone. The white woman who'd tutted earlier was whispering urgently to her husband. Cheryl's face had gone from red to pale. "That's a serious accusation." "Yes, it is. And I have documentation of every interaction we've had since boarding. The unnecessary ticket check. The fabricated noise complaints. The threats to relocate us. And now this refusal of meal service. Would you like me to continue?" For a moment, Cheryl seemed to realize she'd made a mistake. But pride, or perhaps something darker, won out. "I'm the senior flight attendant on this aircraft, and I'm ordering you to sit down. If you don't comply, you'll be met by security when we land." Elizabeth pulled out her phone, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I'm going to take your name and employee number. And I'm going to file a formal complaint with Skyward Airlines the moment we land." "You do that." Cheryl's voice dripped with contempt. "I'm sure they'll take it very seriously." "They would." Elizabeth almost smiled at the irony. Instead, she said, "Girls, come here please." Zoe, Maya, and Jade unbuckled and crossed to their mother, forming a small huddle. They looked scared now, and that broke Elizabeth's heart more than anything else. We're going to sit back down, Elizabeth said clearly, for the benefit of the recording phones and her own documentation. But I want everyone on this plane to know that my daughters are being denied service because of how we look. Not because of our behavior. Not because of any rule violation. But because a flight attendant has decided we don't belong in first class. She guided her girls back to their seats, where they huddled together, Jade crying now, Maya clutching Zoe's hand. Elizabeth felt a rage so profound it was almost transcendent. These were her babies. Her precious, brilliant, kind-hearted girls. And they were learning a lesson she desperately hoped they'd never have to learn this young. Kevin appeared moments later, his face anguished, with 3 chicken meals. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "Please don't let this represent all of us." Elizabeth accepted the meals without comment. She helped the girls eat, though their appetites had vanished. She kept her expression neutral, but inside she was making plans. The flight continued in tense silence. Cheryl avoided their section of the cabin. Kevin checked on them twice more, clearly distressed. The black couple introduced themselves, Bernard and Tasha Williams from Sacramento, and asked if Elizabeth needed witnesses for her complaint. She gratefully accepted their contact information. Zoe had stopped reading. Maya was no longer interested in the window. Jade's tablet sat forgotten in her lap. They just sat quietly, smaller than they'd been when they boarded, and Elizabeth wanted to burn the world down. Instead, she did something smarter. She opened her laptop's secure browser and logged into Skyward Airlines' executive system, the one only 12 people in the company had access to. She pulled up Cheryl Whitmore's employee file. 15 years with the company. Generally positive reviews, though there were 2 complaints from passengers in the last year, both people of color who'd reported being treated dismissively. Both complaints had been marked as unsubstantiated and filed away. Elizabeth dug deeper. Cheryl had been passed over for a promotion to head flight attendant 3 times. The position had gone to a younger black woman named Simone Rodriguez. Elizabeth didn't know Simone personally, but she knew her by reputation, innovative, beloved by passengers, exactly the kind of employee Skyward wanted representing their brand. The picture became clearer. Resentment. Perceived grievance. A sense of being displaced. It didn't excuse the behavior, but it explained it. Elizabeth opened a secure message to her chief operating officer, Michael Chen, no relation, despite sharing her father's surname. "Michael, I need you to personally review something the moment we land at JFK. High priority. We'll explain in person." His response came within minutes. "Whatever you need." Then she texted Paul, her assistant. "Landing at 4 p.m. Clear my schedule. I need the conference room at HQ and I need legal there. Also, have someone pull all camera footage from Flight 2847, LAX to JFK, today's date. All of it." Paul's response, "On it. Everything okay?" Elizabeth typed back, "No. But it will be." They were 2 hours from New York when things escalated again. Jade needed to use the restroom. Elizabeth walked her there, standing outside the small lavatory while her daughter went in. When Jade emerged, wiping her hands on a paper towel, Cheryl was suddenly there, blocking the aisle. "Your daughter needs to go back to her seat immediately. She just used the restroom. We're walking back now. Children aren't allowed to wander the cabin." Elizabeth's patience, already threadbare, finally snapped. She's 8 years old. She needed the bathroom. She didn't wander anywhere. "And you," she stepped closer, her voice dropping to something cold and precise, "you have been targeting my children since we boarded. I want your full name, your employee number, and the name of your supervisor. I'm the senior attendant. I don't have a supervisor on this flight." "Everyone has a supervisor. Who's your regional manager?" Cheryl's eyes narrowed. "But are you going to try to get me fired over some imagined slight?" "Imagined?" Elizabeth gestured back toward her daughters. "You've harassed us for 3 hours. You've made false complaints. You've denied service. You've created a hostile environment for 3 8-year-old children. There's nothing imagined about it. Maybe if you taught your children how to behave properly in first class. My children have been silent and still for the entire flight. The only person creating a disturbance is you." Other passengers were watching again, but now there was a shift. People were starting to understand. A white man in row 3 spoke up. "She's right. Those kids have been perfect. I have teenagers who don't behave that well." Tasha Williams called out, "I've been recording this whole interaction. This is harassment, plain and simple." Cheryl looked around, suddenly realizing that public opinion had turned against her. Her face hardened. "Fine. When we land, I'll be reporting all of you for attempting to intimidate crew members." "You do that," Elizabeth said, "and I'll be having a conversation with your CEO about discrimination and hostile treatment of passengers. I'm sure that will be a fascinating discussion." The CEO of Skyward Airlines doesn't take meetings with complainers. Elizabeth felt a smile, cold and sharp, cross her face. "You'd be surprised." She took Jade's hand and returned to their seats, feeling Cheryl's angry stare on her back. She helped Jade buckle in, then leaned across to all 3 girls. "I need you 3 to listen to me very carefully. What happened today is wrong. It's not your fault, and you did nothing to deserve it. But this is why Mommy works so hard at her job. This is why representation matters. This is why we keep fighting even when we're tired. Do you understand?" 3 small heads nodded. "Good. Now, in about an hour and a half, we're going to land. And then Mommy is going to teach that woman a lesson about judging people she knows nothing about." "What kind of lesson?" Zoe asked. Elizabeth's smile was all teeth. "The kind that makes sure this never happens to another family." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Flight attendants, prepare for landing." New York City sparkled below them, the skyline a familiar promise of home. Elizabeth had grown up in the Bronx before her career took her west. But today there was no joy in the descent. Only grim determination. Elizabeth gathered the girls' things, making sure tablets and books were packed away. She kept her movements calm, her voice even, though inside she was already 3 steps ahead, planning the next hour like a chess master planning a checkmate. The plane touched down smoothly. As they taxied to the gate, Elizabeth pulled out her phone and sent one more text to Paul. "Which gate are we arriving at?" "C-47. I've arranged a car. Also, Michael wants to know if you need security." Elizabeth considered this. "Yes, but discreet. And tell them to wait outside." The plane pulled into the gate. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers began gathering their things, that familiar shuffle and rustle of people eager to be off the plane. Elizabeth kept her daughters seated while others deplaned, not wanting them caught in the crowd. Cheryl appeared at the front of first class, microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to thank you for flying with Skyward Airlines today. We hope." She stopped mid-sentence as she saw Elizabeth pulling down their bags from the overhead compartment. For a moment, their eyes met across the cabin. Cheryl's expression was triumphant, as if she'd won some battle. She had no idea the war was just beginning. Elizabeth guided the girls into the aisle. They walked past Cheryl, who didn't move, forcing them to squeeze by. One final petty gesture. At the aircraft door, Kevin was waiting. "Again, I'm so sorry about." "What's your last name, Kevin?" Elizabeth asked. He blinked. "Martinez. Kevin Martinez." "Thank you, Kevin Martinez. Your compassion today mattered. Don't forget that." They walked up the jetway and into the terminal. JFK was busy as always, a river of humanity flowing in all directions. Elizabeth spotted Paul immediately, efficient, unflappable Paul, who'd been with her for 6 years and knew her every mood. "The car's waiting," he said by way of greeting, falling into step beside her. "Michael's already at headquarters with legal. They're reviewing the footage now." "Good. Girls, this is Paul. He works with Mommy." Paul smiled at the triplets. "I've heard so much about you 3. Your mom talks about you constantly. She's very proud of you." The girls managed small smiles. They were exhausted, emotionally drained, the excitement of the trip completely overshadowed by what had happened. "Can we still see Grandma Jean?" Maya asked quietly. "Absolutely," Elizabeth assured her. "We're going to drop our bags at the hotel, and then Grandma's expecting us for dinner. But first, Mommy has some work to do." They emerged into the cold New York November air. A black car waited curbside, and Paul efficiently loaded their luggage. Elizabeth was about to get in when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Ma'am. Ma'am, wait." She turned. Kevin Martinez was jogging toward them, still in his uniform, his expression urgent. "I'm sorry to follow you, but I had to tell you, Cheryl's in there right now filing a report saying you were verbally abusive and threatened her. She's trying to get you banned from the airline." Elizabeth felt a surge of cold fury. "Is she now?" "I couldn't let her lie like that. I saw everything. So did at least 5 other passengers. If you need me to make a statement, I do. Paul, get Mr. Martinez's full contact information. He'll need to come to headquarters within the hour." Kevin's eyes widened. "Headquarters? I don't understand." "You will." Elizabeth handed him her card, the simple one that just said, Elizabeth Chen-Morrison, with a phone number. "Call that number when you're ready to come in. Thank you for being a decent human being today. It's rarer than it should be." She got into the car with the girls, and they drove away, leaving Kevin staring at the card in confusion. Skyward Airlines corporate headquarters occupied floors 40 through 52 of a gleaming tower in Manhattan's financial district. Elizabeth had chosen the location deliberately, visible, prominent, a statement that the daughter of a baggage handler now owned the sky. They arrived at 5:15. Paul had arranged for a company suite at a nearby hotel where a nanny, trusted, thoroughly vetted, was waiting to take the girls for room service and movies while Elizabeth handled business. "Mom, you're not in trouble, are you?" Zoe asked as Elizabeth hugged them goodbye in the hotel lobby. "No, baby. I'm not in trouble. The lady on the plane is." "Good," Jade said fiercely. "She was mean." "Yes, she was. And mean people need to learn that actions have consequences. Now, you 3 be good for Miss Patricia. I'll be back in a few hours and then we'll call Grandma." She kissed each of their foreheads, breathing in the smell of their hair, letting their presence ground her. Then she straightened, smoothed down her coat, and became Elizabeth Chen-Morrison, CO. The car took her to Skyward Tower. She entered through the executive entrance, her heels clicking on marble floors. Security nodded respectfully. They knew her, of course. She took the private elevator to the 49th floor, where the executive suites were located. Michael Chen was waiting in her office, along with Veronica Williams, Skyward's general counsel, and Marcus Thompson, VP of Human Resources. They all stood when she entered. "Show me the footage," Elizabeth said without preamble. Marcus pulled up the video on the conference room screen. Every Skyward plane had multiple cameras for security and training purposes. They watched in silence as the entire flight played out from multiple angles. Cheryl's harassment was even more obvious on video. Her expression when she first saw Elizabeth and the girls. The unnecessary ticket checks. The false announcement about noise. The meal service incident. All of it, documented in high definition. "There's more," Veronica said grimly. She pulled up Cheryl's personnel file. 2 previous complaints of discriminatory behavior. Both dismissed by her previous supervisor, who, incidentally, retired last year and is now a consultant for our main competitor. "I'm recommending we reopen both cases." "Do it," Elizabeth said. "Michael, what's the chain of command here?" Cheryl reports to Regional Flight Service Manager Dorothy Hansen, who reports to VP of In-Flight Services Robert Klein, who reports to me. Michael's expression was carefully neutral, but Elizabeth had worked with him long enough to see the anger underneath. "Dorothy's in the building. So is Robert. I thought you might want to speak with them personally." "I do. But first," she looked at Marcus, "where's Cheryl Whitmore right now?" According to the crew roster, she's in the employee lounge at JFK. Her shift ended 20 minutes ago. She did file an incident report claiming you threatened her and were verbally abusive. Elizabeth laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. "Of course she did. Have airport security escort her to a private room. Tell them the CO needs to speak with her. Don't tell them which she..." Marcus's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded and made the call. Kevin Martinez arrived 10 minutes later, looking nervous and confused. When he saw Elizabeth sitting in the CO's office, the massive space with its view of the entire city, the framed photo of her with the president on one wall, the dozens of industry awards on another, his jaw actually dropped. You're Elizabeth Chen-Morrison. Of Skyward. I am. Please, sit down, Kevin. You're not in any trouble. In fact, you're probably the only crew member on that flight who isn't. I need you to walk me through everything you witnessed today. Kevin told his story haltingly at first, then with more confidence as he realized no one was going to punish him for telling the truth. He described Cheryl's immediate negative reaction to seeing Elizabeth and the girls. Her whispered comments to other crew members. Her deliberate targeting. She said something to me in the galley, Kevin admitted. She said, people like that think they can buy their way into spaces they don't belong. Someone needs to remind them where they really fit. Elizabeth felt Veronica stiffen beside her. She specifically said, people like that? Yes. I asked her what she meant, and she just looked at me like I was stupid. But the meaning was clear. Thank you, Kevin. Would you be willing to put all of this in a written statement? Absolutely. Good. Marcus will get you set up with that. And Kevin? You'll be receiving a formal commendation for your conduct today. We need more flight attendants like you. After Kevin left, Elizabeth stood and walked to her window, looking out over the city lights. Behind her, her team waited. How do you want to handle this? Michael finally asked. Elizabeth turned. Cheryl Whitmore is terminated, effective immediately. For documented discrimination, harassment of passengers, filing false reports, and conduct unbecoming of a Skyward employee. Dorothy Hansen is suspended pending investigation into why she dismissed previous complaints. And I want a full audit of every complaint filed against every employee in the last 5 years. If there's a pattern we've been missing, I want to know. The union will fight the termination, Veronica warned. Let them. We have video evidence, witness statements, and a pattern of behavior. This is righteous termination, and I'll personally argue it in front of any arbitrator they want. What about the media? Michael asked carefully. If this gets out. When it gets out, Elizabeth corrected. I'm not hiding this. Tomorrow morning, I want a press release. Skyward Airlines has zero tolerance for discrimination. We took immediate action when an employee violated our values. We're implementing new training protocols and complaint review processes. We're owning this, getting ahead of it, and using it to be better. Veronica nodded slowly. The car from JFK carrying Cheryl Whitmore pulled up to a private security office at the airport. She was confused, irritated, but not worried. She'd filed her report. She'd documented the hostile passenger. She'd done everything by the book, her version of the book, anyway. 2 security officers escorted her to a small conference room. Someone from corporate needs to speak with you, one said. Cheryl settled in to wait, checking her phone, already planning her evening. Maybe she'd been a bit harsh on that family, but honestly, they needed to know their place. First class was for people who belonged there, not for. The door opened. Elizabeth walked in, flanked by Michael Chen and Veronica Williams. She wore her power like a second skin now, no longer the patient mother, but the executive who'd clawed her way to the top of a brutal industry. Cheryl's face went pale, then red, then pale again. You can't be. Elizabeth Chen-Morrison, CEO of Skyward Airlines. The company you work for. Or rather, worked for. Elizabeth sat down, placing a folder on the table between them. Ms. Whitmore, you're terminated effective immediately for discrimination, harassment, filing false reports, and violating every value this company holds. You can't do this. I have rights. The union will see the video evidence. They'll read Kevin Martinez's statement. They'll review the complaints we dismissed that we never should have. And they'll realize you don't have a leg to stand on. Elizabeth leaned forward. You saw 3 black children in first class and decided they didn't belong. You harassed them. You denied them service. You traumatized them. My children will remember this day for the rest of their lives. And you thought you'd get away with it because I was just another passenger you could intimidate. Cheryl's hands were shaking. This isn't fair. I've given 15 years to this airline. And in 15 years, You learned nothing about treating people with dignity. Elizabeth stood. Security will escort you out. Your personal belongings will be shipped. You're banned from all Skyward properties. And Ms. Whitmore? I hope the next time you see a black family anywhere, on a plane, in a restaurant, in first class or coach or anywhere at all, you remember this moment. Remember that you never know who you're talking to. Remember that everyone deserves respect, regardless of what you think they can afford or where you think they belong. She walked out, leaving Cheryl sputtering protests to the lawyers who would handle the technical termination process. At 8:30 that evening, Elizabeth finally made it back to the hotel suite. The girls were in pajamas, watching a movie with Ms. Patricia. When they saw their mother, they rushed to her. "Did you fire the mean lady?" Jade asked. "I did." "Good," all three said in unison. Elizabeth gathered them close, these three perfect humans she and Marcus had made. "I need you to know something. What happened today wasn't right, and it wasn't your fault. But it happened because the world isn't fair yet. We're working on it. Mommy and lots of other people, but it takes time." "Is that why you work so much?" Maya asked. "To make things more fair?" "Yes, baby. That's exactly why." Zoe adjusted her glasses, her expression serious. "We'll help. When we grow up, we'll help make things fair too." Elizabeth felt tears finally come, the ones she'd been holding back all day. "You already are, just by being exactly who you are. Now, should we call Grandma Jean and tell her we'll see her tomorrow? Tonight, I think we just need to be together." They ordered room service, real food, not airplane crackers. They watched movies. They talked about everything and nothing. And slowly, the girls began to laugh again, to relax, to be children again instead of targets of someone else's hate. Around 11, after the girls were asleep in the adjoining room, Elizabeth sat in the dark, looking out at the New York skyline. Her phone buzzed with messages. Paul confirming tomorrow's press conference. Michael sending the final termination paperwork. Veronica outlining the new anti-discrimination training protocol. And one from Tasha Williams, the woman who'd recorded the incident. "My husband and I wanted you to know, we see you. We stand with you. Those girls are lucky to have a mother who fights for them. Stay strong." Elizabeth typed back. "Thank you for bearing witness. It matters more than you know." She thought about her father, who'd loaded luggage in the belly of planes and never got to sit above the wing. Her mother, who'd cleaned these very terminals and never complained. Marcus, who'd always told their daughters they were queens, that they belonged everywhere, that no one could make them small. Tomorrow the story would break. There would be interviews, think pieces, social media storms. Some would support her. Others would claim she was playing the race card, that she was too sensitive, that Cheryl was just having a bad day. But Elizabeth had raised three girls who now knew, bone deep, that when someone treats you as less than, you stand up. You document. You fight. You don't accept being made small. That lesson, as painful as it was, might be the most valuable thing she could teach them. She walked to the bedroom door, looking at her daughters sleeping peacefully, Jade's arm thrown over Maya, Zoe's book still clutched in her hands. Tomorrow they'd see Grandma Jean. They'd visit the museum. They'd be children again. But they'd also be warriors. Just like their mother. Just like their father would have wanted. And the next time someone tried to tell them they didn't belong somewhere, they'd know exactly what to do. 3 months later, the industry magazine spread featured Elizabeth on the cover, the CEO who flies coach, Elizabeth Chen-Morrison's crusade for airline equality. Inside was the full story. The incident on Flight 2847. The swift termination. The company-wide policy changes. The new bias training required for all Skyward employees. The independent complaint review board staffed by civil rights advocates. But the article also featured the Williams family, Kevin Martinez, now promoted to lead flight attendant trainer, and the dozens of other passengers who'd come forward with their own stories. And it featured Zoe, Maya, and Jade Morrison, 3 8-year-olds who'd learned that sometimes the hardest lessons come with the most important truths. Skyward Airlines customer satisfaction ratings hit an all-time high. Diversity applications for flight attendant positions tripled. And somewhere in Queens, a woman named Cheryl Whitmore learned that cruelty always has a cost. But more importantly, 3 little girls learned that they were queens who belonged everywhere. And no one could ever take that away.